Wayne County and 13 years on the city council. So had a lot of opportunity to work with 4410 and all of the aspects of process review, environmental review, and look forward to kind of hearing and being a part of it on this side of the desk. So thank you again for the opportunity to introduce myself and look forward to working with you all.
All right, thanks very much, Member Holman. Now I'm going to turn over to the Executive Director, Catherine Neusler, to call the roll, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I don't believe we were expecting Commissioner Arnold, but we have Director Polish from Commerce.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
Board Member Bakken. Don't see him. Board Member Bauerkemper.
Yes, here, thanks.
Don't believe we have Board Member Cunningham. Do we have Dan Hoff from MDH? He might have told me he couldn't make it.
I think he just arrived.
Okay. Dan Hoff, are you here with us? Yes, here, but no mic access. Okay, thanks, Dan. Commissioner Daubenberger, the chair, I believe will be joining us in about 10 minutes. I don't think she's here yet. Okay. Board Member Foster.
Here.
Okay. Board Member Hintz. How are you?
Here.
Board Member Katzenberger.
Happy to be here.
Commissioner Kessler, I don't believe we are expecting today. Board Member Connor Steenberg, I believe, was not going to be able to join us either. Vice Chair Martin, you're here.
Yes.
Commissioner Verlack, able to join us today? For anyone from D, maybe Deputy Commissioner McKinnon? Board Member Nelson.
Present.
Commissioner Peterson, I believe, could not be here, but Steve Roos, you're with us today.
Yes, I am.
Commissioner Christensen from Admin.
Yes, I'm here and I'm turning my video on momentarily.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Stroman.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Board Member Holman. You are here.
I'm here for the very first time. Thank you.
And I believe we do not have Chair Zelli, do we? But we have Sue Vento from Met Council. She was having mic issues earlier. Okay. Okay, Mr. Chair, I think we have 9, so we should have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Executive Director Neusler. Our first item of business is to approve the consent agenda, the meeting minutes from June 21st, EQB meeting, as well as the agenda for today, August 16th, 2023. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Member Katzenberger, so moved.
Any second?
Second, Member Nelson.
Any discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Say nay. Okay, with no opposition, the motion carries. The consent agenda is adopted. So I'm going to turn it back over to Executive Director Neusler for her report.
All right, thank you, Chair. Starting just briefly with the logistics and things for today's meeting, and I'm going to try to show the slides appropriately. And just a reminder, we are using the Teams webinar format. There is a chat that is open and visible to everyone, but for our our visitors and commenters today. The chat is not kept as part of the meeting records. So if you are using it, please focus on using the chat only for logistical issues. If you can't hear, if you can't see, if you want to speak, you can identify that in the chat. But we are not going to be able to, we're not keeping the chat, so please don't put substantive comments in there. With the webinar format, board members and presenters are able to mute and unmute themselves. Attendees are not able to do so during the meeting, but when you want to make a comment, we will enable you to unmute yourself so you can speak. Board members, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback. We are fully virtual, except for the few of us here in the room at the MPCA building. So probably easiest to use the raise hand feature in discussions, or you may feel free to jump in. To help people follow the discussion, it would be great if you're able to put your camera on. For those of you in the public, there are going to be 2 opportunities for public comment today. The first one will be on the proposed fiscal year 24 organizational work plan, and we will have comment on that after the item is presented prior to the board discussion. And then we will have space for public comment if we still have time at the end of the meeting for other items. The procedures and guidelines are on page 2 of the packet, or they're here on the slide in front of us. So again, when we get to one of the public comment portions and you would like to speak, use your raised hand feature, and that will number you, and we will go through the list of commenters. And please keep your hand raised until you've given your comment. Alternatively, you can use the chat feature to let us know you would like to make a comment, but again, please do not put your comments in the chat. We'll queue commenters. I think Eric will probably do that when we get to that point in the agenda. And then we will be keeping time to make sure that we have time to get through our agenda. If anybody has any technical difficulties or procedural questions, if you have access to the chat, you could put those in there. Again, technical difficulties, or you can email the info.eqb@state.mn email, or call us at 651-757-2877. So these are the public comment guidelines. And just a note here to see where your raise hand feature is for when we get to that portion. If you are joining us by phone, it's *5. So having gone through the logistics, I'll also remind you that this meeting is being recorded today. And I will move on to the executive director's report. First off, I am very excited to announce that EQB has a new communications and engagement staff person, Priscilla Villawat. She's sitting here behind me at the table. We kind of see her in the camera. She started this morning, so this is day 1, but we're very excited to have her on board. Also, in the various discussions that I've had with many of you, and as noted in the work plan and the memo, we have decided that we are not going to move forward with planning for an environmental congress in the fall. Although we had some good ideas after further discussion, it became clear that we really needed some additional capacity to host the kind of purposeful event that we wanted to have. And so I'm really excited to have Priscilla here to help us start thinking about that and give her some good time to help us further refine and flesh out our items. Just another note, we have recently updated the guidance for including climate in environmental review in the EAW documents. That document has been updated and is now on our website. So there's new guidance as of a couple of weeks ago, and we're aiming to give that document pretty frequent review and updates moving forward. That is always an area of change, and of course will continue to get adapted as we move forward with our greenhouse gas emissions calculator work that was legislatively funded. The last thing I'm going to mention, board members, and there was an additional packet or addendum to the packet that was provided to you yesterday with many comments on the work plan. But in addition, on page 38 of the packet, you have a comment that was submitted after the June board meeting in relation to the issue around environmental review for the Kinsa project, hotel project in Duluth. And there was some additional information in the addendum provided by board member Bauer Kemper, who's dug into this and provided some additional information. The comments there continue to center around the determination of the responsible governmental unit for environmental review within the City of Duluth government. The comment in the packet did raise a concern about the memo that I wrote for the June meeting, and particularly a phrase that said, quote, "The Duluth City Code also indicated that the Planning Commission is an advisory body to the Duluth City Council with respect to environmental review." And that comment raised the concern that EQB was interpreting the law through that phrase, which was not the intention, and which we tried to state in the rest of the memo. It's a difficult issue to talk about and explain without appearing like we are making a legal interpretation. However, for clarity, that line probably should have just stated that the Duluth City Code also indicated that the Planning Commission is an advisory body to the City Council without reference to environmental review. And how that relates to environmental review is now under review in the courts, and we are keeping track of that and will be monitoring the decision. And then I know the board member Bauer-Kemper provided some information as well concerning the City Council in Duluth, and that they, in their decision, referred to an email that was sent by an EQB staff person. And I would just note that when that was sent, no EQB monitor notices had been published for the project at issue. So of course, the question here is there was decision made by the Planning Commission and a notice published, and then that decision was changed by the City Council and a second notice was published. So that the board member Bauer-Kemper provided some information in digging into the City Council, and that is all I have, and I'm open to questions about those or discussion about any of those items. Okay. So I know
All
I
right.
see.
I forgot to unmute myself. Sorry. Member Bauer-Kemper, go ahead, please. And
Yeah,
remember to
thank you,
unmute
Chair.
yourself.
Yep, I got it, I think here. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, just wanted to underscore my little document that I'm grateful to Catherine and Hazel for including in the packet there. It pertains indeed particularly to some guidance that was provided by the EQB to the City of Duluth. And that guidance was indeed provided after the city had notified the EQB of their initial decision, but before it was noticed in the monitor. And the City of Duluth held a hearing on the 8th of May, as it says there, which was after their decision was noticed in the monitor. They held an appeal hearing, and that appeal hearing was based on the city's interpretation of the email from EQB. And so the city determined, based on its interpretation of that email from EQB, that it could hold an appeal hearing, or that it could hear an appeal of an already noticed decision. And my understanding of the statutes and rule is that any appeal of an already noticed decision is to be held through the courts. And so it would appear that the EQB provided guidance that ended up being interpreted by the city as authorization to hold an extrajudicial appeal of a noticed decision or a final decision. And so while I have concerns about the particular procedure in this instance, I have broader structural concerns that if the EQB doesn't follow up deliberately and assertively on this, that we have contributed, perhaps unintentionally, but we've contributed to potentially establishing a precedent through which the decisions that have been noticed in the monitor can be appealed in ways that are not provided for in statute and rule. And so it's a significant concern. And my suggestion here is that we as the EQB look into our latitude provided in statute to initiate judicial review or intervene in judicial review. I don't know what that process entails, But this is something that I don't think we can be passive in relation to. I think that tracking the existing court case is important, but that is a case that doesn't directly ask or address the particular question that I have at hand, which is, can a local unit of government hold an appeal for an already noticed decision? And then furthermore, in the background of that, I think we need to have some deliberate consideration and perhaps conversation of what role does the EQB have in providing guidance to local governments that then is being used in this way. So significant issues and anxieties at hand, and I'd like us to address that with good attention and deliberately. Thanks.
Thank you, Public Member Bauer Kemper, for those thoughts. On the first item you had mentioned in regards to intervening into judicial review and can a local unit of government hold an appeal for an already noticed decision? Let me just turn to Executive Director Nuschler for a second. So, Catherine, is that something that we have already looked into, had our AG look into, or do you have any thoughts on that particular question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Daubenberger. After consulting with council, after I received the information from Board Member Bauer Kemper, who I really appreciate looking in, had looked into this, because we had been sort of told that an email of ours was being relied on, but we were given a wrong date and we couldn't figure out what they were referring to. And so I really appreciate that he was able to sort that out for us. I do think they did misinterpret it, right? We really don't have the authority to give permission to change that statute. And, I think there was a little bit of miscommunication between the staff who sort of knew we had received the notice for future publication and the staff who sent the advice that said, basically the responsible governmental unit gets to decide how they make their decisions. My understanding is that in terms of the ability to intervene, the rules aren't very specific. My understanding, I think the rules do say that we can intervene in cases. Often that has to be done within a certain period of time, like before the cases, the briefs are filed, which would have been, I think, likely the end of July in this case. My understanding is that if the board wants to file a lawsuit or to intervene in a lawsuit, the appropriate action is to make a request of the Attorney General's office, who would represent us in that, and then they would look into it and see what the appropriate action would be and whether they feel like it's something that could be done. So it is possible that in this particular case that it is too late to get status as an intervener, even though that appears to be allowed by our statutes. But we could request the Attorney General's office to look into that.
Thank you, Director Nuschler. I think I would like to, as board chair, based on that, have a request to RAG to look into that and the question about, can a local unit of government hold an appeal for an already noticed decision?
Okay, I'm trying to craft that into something actionable. Would the board like to ask the Attorney General's office to review and consider whether we can intervene in this case?
Yes, if that has not been looked into yet, yes, then that would be another request of the AG's office, is to look into that. And it looks like we've got first a hand up by Commissioner Stroman. Go ahead, Commissioner Stroman.
Thank you, Chair Daubenberger. While I understand, I think the desire to make sure we know what options are available for the EQB, I will just say I am not clear on what we'd actually be asking the Attorney General to do and what the I mean, I just don't have enough knowledge about the appropriate role of the EQB here, given that what Director Neusler just said was it appears that the city misinterpreted our email. And so, I mean, I just want to be careful about the EQB intervening in a situation that may have resulted from an unfortunate and incorrect interpretation of an email we sent and the precedent of what that means, given the number of times our staff is asked to communicate with local units of government about environmental review. So, you know, at this point, I would prefer that a request be broader as to what an appropriate role for the EQB might be in this, but I am uncomfortable going to the Attorney General and asking, can we intervene in this case? I don't even know on what basis and from what perspective. I don't feel like I have the background to say we should be spending Attorney General time on that at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. Yeah, and on this, there's this particular case in question, and I guess I was also understanding public member Bauer-Kemper's question to be a little more general in nature, but maybe I misunderstood that. As you noted, Commissioner Stroman, you are understanding this to be maybe a miscommunication, misunderstanding, and misreading of an email. That could be that in this case, but B, I will turn it back to Public Member Bauer-Kemper for a moment to address my ask of clarity on his question. Thanks.
Sure, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Stroman. So for me, there are two primary issues involved. One is the email and its interpretation, which I think is a matter of practice, and I think it's something that we as the EQB and EQB staff should learn from and be paying attention to. The other issue, which can be separated from the email and its interpretation. The other question, which is more broader, as the chair indicates, is can a local unit of government hear an appeal of an already noticed decision? And so that is a broad question, and I certainly support and hope that we can inquire with the AG's office to get some information on that question. I also think that question is at issue in this particular case. And so if the EQB were to exercise its latitude under subdivision 10 of 116D to initiate or intervene in judicial review, we would be doing so not in particular relation to the email and its interpretation, but in relation to that question. Can this city hear an appeal of an already noticed decision? So the questions for the AG office are not particularly tied to this email. I gave that in my little document as background for how the story emerged and has unfolded. The question for clarity for the AG's office, in my view, is can a local unit of government hear an appeal of an already noticed decision? And my interest in intervening in this case or initiating review of this particular case pertains to that exact same question. Thanks.
Thank you, Public Member Bauer-Kemper. And there are a couple of hands up, but Commissioner Stroman, I see your hand up again, and so I'm thinking it might be in regards to kind of this line of discussion. Why don't we go to you first, and then we will go to Public Member Foster.
Thank you, Chair Dobbenberger. And I did understand that in what Member Bauer-Kemper said initially. I think my point is they're intervening in a case is not the only way to get at the root of that question and is not the only option that the EQB has. And so before we choose one particular option and spend Attorney General time and legal expense on that, I would like to understand the landscape of what all the options are available to us so that we can make a good decision around that.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Stroman. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying when you talk about other options available. Understanding those options from our AG or other ways to approach this than using AG time.
Some options may come from staff, some may need consultation from the AG, but if we only ask the AG about intervention in this case, that is the question they're going to answer. So I think we need to understand if we are concerned about the issue that Member Bauer Kemper raised, which I certainly understand why we would. What are the multiple ways or any of the ways we might get at answering that question other than intervening in a particular legal case at this time, which is, I think not something that the EQB should undertake lightly. I certainly think the question needs to be addressed and EQB needs to be clear on it. But there are lots of questions around environmental review and lots of legal action, and I just think we need to have some approach for how we make decisions about where we intervene and where we don't intervene.
Thank you for that. Okay, let me go to public member Foster.
Thank you, Chair Javenberger. And I do want to, thank you, Member Bauer Camper, for that memo. And I've been, very concerned about this whole process. I think, as Commissioner Stroman kind of suggests, it's hard to follow this, as it's going on month after month, and we've gotten piecemeal information, which is what normally would happen. I share, Member Bauer Camper's, deep kind of, it's disturbing, I think, how everything has gone down. And so whether or not, intervening legally is the way to go, I agree with Commissioner Stroman that, maybe the best thing to do is to figure out what are some options before us. I would, at minimum, kind of like to see a full accounting of what's going on. We've gotten various public comments. There's been responses by the EQB, and it's kind of hard to go back and follow these. But I think it's important for the board and for EQB staff to take stock of this whole situation. And as Member Bauer Camper has said, to see what do we learn from this? Is there something we need to do right now? Perhaps. If there's nothing that we have to do right now or we can do, what are we learning from this? Because I think that this is obviously not the kind of situation we want to see and want to see repeated. It's damaged the EQB's reputation among those who have heard about it. And so there's, clear questions that need answers, and we need answers to sooner than later.
Thank you, public member Foster. And I think I see another hand up. Oh, that might still be public member Foster's. All right. Well, I know we need to move on from this, but how about I request the EQB staff, Executive Director Nuschler and your staff, if you could look into this just in order to bring back next month for the board. What is the process when there is an appeal for an already noticed decision, as far as your familiarity with the process, how that is handled, for those of us on the board who are familiar with all the steps in the process. And I know you and your staff could probably walk us through that. And then of any of this discussion that we had today where there's a legal question that would be best answered by our Attorney General, that would require them to look into that. But please advise what questions you'd recommend we go to the Attorney General on. They do that, Executive Director Nuschler?
Yes, Chair Daubenberger. I think what we can likely do, my understanding from past discussion with council, is that we can ask for sort of an Attorney General's opinion on essentially what does the law say, a formal opinion. And so I think board member Bauer Kemper's little memo had a good statement in it that, like, when an RGU's decision is noticed, it has been consistent practice to consider that to be a final decision. And so I think we could I'm thinking through this since this is a new thing for me, but I think what we could do is we could craft a question and prepare a resolution for the board to make that request of the AG's office that we could review next month. I do, unless anyone, the only thing would be if anyone, I guess, felt very strongly that we should ask for intervening status, that would need to be done sooner rather than later. But again, our preliminary thought is that that window has likely already closed. But as I said, we are keeping track of the case.
Thank you. And Public Member Bauer-Camper, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Catherine. So in many ways, I share Commissioner Stroman's curiosity about what other pathways are available to both illuminate this question in general and for the purposes of moving forward, but also in order to ensure that this particular case unfolds in a proper and legal way. And the only pathway that I saw as I did my little look at the statutes and rule was, oh, subdivision 10 here, right? And indicates that the EQB can initiate judicial review or intervene in it. And so that's what I've mentioned in my little memo. I do feel strongly about it, and I don't want our cautious, deliberate pursuit of the principal question, the conceptual question, to lead us to a timeline that would end up neglecting the actual case at hand. But I don't know how to balance that. So I'm inclined to include, if it's amenable to the rest of the board, to at least include in our inquiry to the Attorney General's office, do we have the latitude at this time to intervene in this case? What does that entail? What does that look like? And so there are questions as to, are we beyond some sort of timeline that allows us to do that? I don't know the answer to those questions, but I would like to be very deliberate in finding out what our options are to initiate review of this question or to intervene in a case that already exists that might entail this question. So I would like to keep both the broader principle and conceptual question at hand, as well as the relevance to this particular case at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Public Member Bauer-Kemper. Right. So Executive Director Nuschler, let's circle back on this and discuss what we bring back to the board next month on this topic.
Sounds like a plan.
Right. Thank you all for your input today on that item. And then I believe, let's see, next on the agenda. So, and by the way, thank you, Public Member Martin, for starting the meeting for me. And sorry, everyone, that I was coming late from another meeting here today. But is there any other questions before we move on from the Executive Director's report? Any other questions or comments on the Executive Director's report? Okay, I don't think oh, actually, let's see. Oh, not seeing any hands. Okay. We'll go ahead and move on then. Next on the agenda is the fiscal year 24 work plan overview. And we'll have a public comment period on that and approval. So Executive Director Nuschler and Eric Dahl, Kayla Walsh, and Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno from EQB walk us through the work plan and invite discussion afterwards. So welcome back, Executive Director Nuschler, and to Eric and Kayla and Rebecca. Go ahead and take it on here.
Right. Well, thank you, Chair and board members. Yes, this is our main focus of this meeting is to walk you through the proposed fiscal year 24 EQB organizational work plan and to talk a little bit too about our strategic plan. We really put those two together. I really put those two together because these really are the key structures and systems that guide us and that help us organize our work. So that's why we're starting with the presentation of the proposed work plan for fiscal 24. And then we'll go through that and take some questions. And after that, I am going to talk about the work that we need to do to update the strategic plan in order to have it continue to guide our work moving forward. So to start with, I just wanted to provide a brief overview of the organizational budget. In the fiscal year 24-25, so the biennial budget, we do have appropriations of about $3.7 million from the legislature. Those are up from prior years, but a big chunk of that increase is due to that specific request that we made for the climate calculator work, the resources to support that improved implementation of the climate change and greenhouse gas emission estimations. Not taking that into account, we did get a slight increase of about 17%, which would cover all of our other increases, including salary increases. As some of you may know, the EQB is primarily funded from the general fund. About 90% of our funding comes from the general fund, and the other 10 to occasionally as high as 15% comes from the environmental fund. Most of our costs are in salary and benefits, and we also get shared services from the MPCA. You can see for this biennium, there's a big chunk for the climate project, and then also some for the Attorney General's expenses, which is what we use should we decide to participate in any lawsuits or have other needs, and other expenses are about 3%. We do receive from the other agencies some funds to support our pollinator work, which are not included in this pie chart. And then just to remind you of our people resources at a glance, since we looked at the monetary resources, as of today, we're up to 6 filled staff positions. We have 2 vacancies, one of which the Environmental Review Planning Director is in the process of being filled. And we also previously had a second communications position. And over the long term, we'll be working to consider our needs for that vacancy. With the legislatively funded climate work, we did get that 1 new position, but that position is currently slated to be temporary. However, I am considering asking for that to be a permanent position because I think we know there's going to be plenty of work to be done in terms of including climate in environmental review. Of course, we also rely a lot on our collaborative work groups and our capacity for our member agencies. And this includes our agency tech reps or technical representatives. We have groups that we form and draw on for specific projects in environmental review. There's the interagency pollinator protection team, and then various staff that contribute to the state water plan that help us pull together the environment and energy metrics and other things like that. One of the things we tried to do in the work plan was to try to be as specific as we could about how we are going to rely on those work groups. And one of the reasons that we really wanted to put together these 2 pieces in kind of one meeting today is that they really represent the sort of different levels of how we decide on and plan our work, you know, with really the strategic plan, setting our overall priorities, and then the work plan designating the projects or key initiatives we're going to take on for the biennium, and then individual work plans assigning work out to our staff and specific project plans to set scope and deliverables for each of our initiatives. And then, you know, the staff and I meet regularly and do regular check-ins and review how we're doing on the work plan items as we go through the fiscal year. Again, our aspirations and our ideas are big. I think we talked about this at the ERIS subcommittee last month when we talked about the environmental review work. There's a large buffet in front of us of things that we could possibly do or potentially do. And I think the strategic plan really tells us what kinds of things we should be, you know, pulling off the buffet and looking to put on our plates. And then the work plan is, you know, what we actually have on our plates. And as I said last month, we have to be mindful about what is our capacity, how big is that plate, what can we put on it, and also mindful of the capacity of our colleagues and our work groups. And we can think of it in different ways in terms of choosing to move things faster or take smaller pieces of them at a time as needed for our capacity. The work plans from previous years and for this year are really driven by the priority results that are included in the EQB's existing strategic plan. And so we're continuing to look at those. We have continued to look at those this year as we've put together the work plan in terms of fostering innovative policy development, leadership on environmental issues, having a transparent, accountable, efficient environmental review process, engaging Minnesotans in policy dialogue, being a trusted and collaborative partner, and supporting local governments. So these are continuing to drive the work plan. So kind of going through that overview, now moving into the specific work plan. It does just cover one fiscal year, thinking that we will likely revise it once the organizational strategic plan is updated. The work plan does focus more on project-based work. I think in the past, it has sometimes included things like budget and organizational management, which are really, they go on my individual work plan, but didn't feel like they needed to be raised up to the level of project-based work plan that we needed to talk about very specifically. So what we tried to do in the work plan sort of spreadsheet that's in the packet is to identify kind of the overarching program, the specific project that's going to be done, the deliverables for fiscal year 24. And that's where we try to be very focused and mindful of our capacity and talk about what really can we get done in this specific year. Planning and other work is going to happen when laid out in terms of tasks, timelines, and key decision points. And then we also tried to put FTEs for EQB staff and where we can interagency support. Of course, we have to be mindful of our capacity, as mentioned. And as we will be hiring the new planning director and our new communications and engagement staff person will be supporting a lot of our key projects across the organization. And as I think I said, we've been talking with our interagency collaborators who've asked us to do more in terms of prioritizing work with clear timelines so we can identify their role and what we are asking for of them. And we really want to make sure that we're using that time of those folks appropriately and wisely. And so we've tried to lay that out. So that's kind of the overview. And then we're going to start by going through environmental review as a program area. Most of the work in environmental review focuses on our priority results around how the environmental review process runs and supporting local governments. And some of the key projects that we identified for fiscal year 24, at least beginning some of the projects, are evaluating the decision criteria for environmental review, doing updates to guidance and training, the mandatory categories report that is due in 2024, the greenhouse gas emission calculator and climate sector guidance, and some revisions to our data management plan. And I'll just note, and Kayla's going to talk about this a little bit more, many of these are projects that are being done for other reasons. The mandatory categories report is required every 3 years, but they do present opportunities and pieces to make progress on the improvement ideas that we heard from the public throughout the continuous improvement project. And then some projects have been developed specifically to respond to improvement ideas. So I think at this point, I'm going to pass the talking over to Kayla to remind us a little bit about that continuous improvement process.
Great, thank you, Director Nuschler. So myself and Jesse Krasinski do make up the current environmental review team here at EQB. So I will walk through several of those work plan items for environmental review, but 2 of them are specifically resulting from our new continuous improvement process. So I will give a very quick recap of that CI or continuous improvement effort. During the June 2023 board meeting, members then voted to approve the steps that are on the screen now. And these are really the result of nearly a year's work of research,
program review and seeking input from environmental review practitioners and members of the public. So the entire effort is laid out in a final report, which is now posted on EQB's website. And in that report, we do highlight that over the past 50 years of the environmental review program, there have been many evaluations of it, but never a very systematic way that prioritizes how we can make updates. So in the past, any improvements have really only been made through legislative direction, responding to specific or one-off issues. And so EQB recognized the need for that more modern and comprehensive approach to environmental review so it can adapt to our current and future environmental challenges, specifically to climate change. And so that's what we had in mind while we built out this new continuous improvement process to uphold the original intent of the program and of the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, while also striving to prioritize the most impactful and effective changes that we can make to address the new climate and environmental justice challenges of our time. And so last June, the board did vote to approve these steps that I have on the screen, and EQB staff have completed our process steps 1 through 4. And then we presented our recommendations for which CI projects we would like to recommend for starting with. So we presented that to ARIS last month. And so we will share ARIS's recommendation to the board. And then the final step is for the board to direct staff to implement those projects. Next slide. Thank you. EQB staff assessed the top 8 improvements that we received, and we scored those through the prioritization matrix that we created. And so those top 8 improvements are listed in the June board packet on packet page 20, if anyone would like to look back at that. They were ranked as they were submitted to us verbatim. So in order to plan for how to implement those ideas, we did need to reorganize those improvement ideas into more tangible projects. So sometimes that did mean a little regrouping by mechanism, but all of those 8 improvement ideas were recommended, or all of those 8 program ideas are included in those 13 projects that we presented to ARIS last month. So of those 13 projects, we chose the 2 on the screen to start with, and we recommended that to ARIS. So the evaluation of our decision criteria, and then the guidance and training, both of those to promote more consistency in review. And so we did have many very highly important projects, but we felt like those these were 2 very foundational places for us to start. And we'll delve more into the details of those initiatives. But before I do, I'd like to share the recommendations specifically, which ARIS made after last month's meeting. So you can go to the next slide, please. So I think ARIS had a really great conversation around those 13 project ideas and staff's recommendation for those 2 on the last slide. And we also heard from several public members, and as a group, ARIS formulated the following recommendations. First, do not remove any of the items, those 2 items that staff currently had recommended. Second, to add the FTE resources specifically that would be needed to complete the proposed items on our work plan. Number 3, to crosswalk those items on the work plan with opportunities for continuous improvement items in general and specifically life cycle assessment. And then 4, identify any stopping points or decision points within the work plan items. And lastly, consider balance between the project work items and the attention placed to strategic planning work. And so at this time, I want to pause and take a moment first to thank ARIS for their excellent leadership really in conversation at last month, and then also to invite Commissioner Stroman, Chair of ARIS, to provide any reflections on that ARIS meeting, or if you want to share more about the recommendations up on the screen.
Thank you, Kayla and Chair Daubenberger and members. I will echo that we had, I think, a really good and robust conversation at ARIS, and we had a number of folks from the public who shared thoughts with us as well. The crux came down to, I think we struggled with, there are a lot of good ideas. There are a lot of there's a lot of important work to be done, and we all feel a lot of urgency around this work. ARIS also felt that given the fact that we were only seeing the environmental review piece of the work plan, that we were not really in a great position to say we should do none of those, we should do one of those, we should do two of those ideas. And so as the recommendation on the screen here notes, we didn't want to remove either of those two continuous improvement items or the other environmental review items on the recommendation from the staff, so that they could be evaluated in the context of the non-environmental review work plan items by the full board. So that was the essence of our recommendation. We felt that in order to help the board then evaluate the whole work plan, it would be helpful to understand the FTE resources that would be needed to complete the proposed items on the work plan. I know that you know, some of the agency members in ARIS, including myself, noted that a lot of these items, when they refer to tech reps or other committees, that that's really the same people from our agencies that support that work. And so, you know, we have to balance with how much we are asking one or two people to do. We thought that the crosswalk of items on the work plan with items, the larger suggestions for continuous improvement, would help us understand where we may be achieving some of those desired continuous improvement items in the course of other work included on the work plan, so we could evaluate where we might be getting a twofer or a threefer. And then we also thought the board would be aided in decision-making by that identification of benchmarks or stopping points in the work, so that if we found that, you know, something could be phased or broken into pieces, that might be something the board wanted to consider. And then finally, and I think this was Member Hintz that brought this up, and a really important point is we have the annual work plan, and then we also have this longer range strategic planning that we want to do. And so making sure, again, as we think about the limited capacity we have, wanting to make sure that we balance sort of that annual work with that long range planning work. So very, very good discussion. And I think our hope was that the additional information in the way it's presented to the board today would help the board evaluate and be able to prioritize the work that is both most important, most urgent, and you know, is doable within the capacity that we have to implement. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that extra context. And we really valued ARIS's conversations, and staff did provide, hopefully address some of these things in the work plan updates in the board packet, page 25 and 26, as a way of sharing those FTE needs per project this fiscal year, and identifying opportunities for continuous improvement ideas in multiple projects. So we did add a column in there noting which CI ideas might be addressed per project. So thank you. Next slide. And that brings us to the first recommendation, the decision criteria evaluation. And staff agreed that evaluating decision criteria could be a very fundamental place to start when we want to modernize our program in a way that could reflect current science and understanding of how projects might impact our environmental resources. We heard a lot of feedback that implementing decision criteria can be complicated or feel difficult for folks because they are not well defined. And the decision criteria as they are currently written right now are in Rule 4410-1700. And that says that in deciding whether a project has potential for significant environmental effects, the following factors shall be considered: type, extent, and reversibility. And that also goes on to add about cumulative potential effects. So whether the cumulative potential effect is significant and the extent to which the environmental effects are subject to mitigation. So we recognize that evaluating if these criteria are working, that's a very big undertaking. And there's also a lot of potential there for us to weave in aspects of other projects, other CI themes into the scoping of our decision criteria changes. So we can tie in that life cycle lens and cumulative impact lens. But in order to do this, we do envision having a lot of engagement up front and framing out what gaps exist and brainstorming improvements, making sure they're very well vetted and defensible. So we would bring in a lot of experts to help us have those conversations. So this provides a good bedrock, I think, for future changes, like things we want to change on the mandatory categories. And we do have a decision point there at the end of this fiscal year where EQB would need to determine if maybe a legislative request would be submitted or an alternative route might be appropriate to pursue additional resources, but that would depend on what this phase 1 evaluation would reveal. Next slide. So the guidance and training is our second CI idea. And this goes beyond updating our current guidance and really creating new best management practices and maybe even working with RGUs to create that training program that would align RGUs to consistently execute review wherever that would be possible. And this idea came from an improvement idea saying that we needed to bolster the capacity of EQB to help RGUs and the public more proactively and meaningfully. And so EQB is currently working toward some minor updates of our current guidance, but and there's also the climate calculator tool that Director Nuschler had mentioned. So we would make some guidance to help use and interpret data from that tool. But this idea would be entirely separate. It would be about building new best management practices, a toolkit, a library with that goal of having a higher level of accountability and consistency across reviews. So some of the topics we're considering for this might be best management practices on notifications involving tribes and reviews, providing guidance on formatting documents to meet accessibility standards, and specific help for petitioners. And so we would start mapping this out and building those resources now, but as the project continues, we would be looking at another decision point in around May of 2024 to see what we've accomplished to that point, and then again consider asking for additional resources if that would be appropriate, especially to implement that larger training program. Next slide. So beyond the continuous improvement projects, our environmental review team will also be working on the mandatory categories report. And this is a priority due to the fact that it's a legislative requirement to conduct the report every 3 years. So we would need to start working now in order to complete it on time by December 2024. We did receive a lot of public comments about changing the mandatory categories. So we need time to vet those ideas and consider that for the authoring of this upcoming report. And that means that we will be performing a more in-depth report than has been authored in the past. So we're asking in this report, do the categories make sense as they're currently structured? Might they benefit from any overarching reorganization? And do the individual categories need to be updated to be more science-based or reflect the current science? So this would likely include a more detailed review on certain categories and whether their thresholds are meeting their intended outcomes. And then additional public engagement is also planned for this. So in terms of that interagency coordination, I do want to also mention that that legislative charge references MPCA and DNR and DOT as agencies that would contribute more to the report because they're named in the legislative charge specifically, and they would examine the mandatory categories that they implement as RGUs. Next slide, please. And then the greenhouse gas emissions calculator and guidance is also a priority project for our team because that we received legislative funding in 2023. The legislative session gave EQB funding for standardizing climate data in environmental review through developing a Minnesota-specific emissions calculator and producing guidance on how to use and interpret the data from that calculator. So this work does involve hiring a staff person and then completing a contracting process and coordinating with a working group to provide input on how that tool is developed. And so we're seeking a contractor with the ability to model the greenhouse gas emissions from different proposed project areas, hopefully for their entire life cycle. So that includes direct and indirect emissions, or scopes 1, 2, and hopefully 3. So in this project, there will be a significant need, I think, to draw upon that cross-agency expertise. And we want to collaborate with all the agencies we can and partners we can to make sure that we're not, or that we are aligning in our methodologies and processes and data. So I think that we'll be able to share more, and we'll know more about the project once it's contracted and scoped based on that contractor's abilities. Next slide, please. All right, last up, we have our data management plan revision. And we list this as a medium priority, mostly because it's not legislatively mandated, but I do think it's really important to help us to track our program effectiveness. So the current data management plan really only scratches the surface in identifying and collecting data, like the number of times a mandatory category is triggered per year. But we see a lot of potential for more environmental impacts to be included in our metrics so that we can truly help answer the question, does this review inform decision makers, and is the program effective? So the new data management plan would start to identify new data sources and use the monitor submission service and the environmental projects database as a new way to collect that information. And so we're kind of exploring the best ways to reimagine our program tracking and the data that we're using so that it aligns with our strategic plan goals and our overall program goals. So that's all going to be explored through the writing of this report. And it will be done primarily by EQB staff, but with review and input from tech reps and local RGUs as well. So I'll be happy to take questions at the end, but I think that's a wrap on all of environmental review's highlights. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Kayla. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I'm Eric Cederlift-Dahl, and I'm just letting you know about some of the highlights around climate and water. This relates to some of our innovative policy development and engagement work we do, and then building trusted partners in collaborative work. With the help of many staff from several state agencies, a lot of these projects have been ongoing for several years. I'm going to talk about the Environment and Energy Report Card, which we did in 2017 and 2019. It was really prepared to provide a snapshot of Minnesota's environment, providing valuable information for the public and policymakers. The 2023-2024 report focuses on the 5 key areas of Minnesota's environment: climate, energy, air, water, and land. And you'll be hearing more about that this fall, and we expect to bring a final energy and environment report card in December and January of this year. The EQB also supports the Climate Action Framework implementation, and we attend meetings, and we will be getting more regular updates on some of this work. We expect an update likely in October, and then moving forward in the future years, probably 3 times a year. And similar with the state water plan, you'll be hearing an update from staff in September, and then moving forward, we'll be giving 2 updates a year at minimum on that, and that relates to our 10-year state water plan, where we coordinate comprehensive long-range water resources for the state every 10 years. And then finally, the U of M 50-year water plan scoping. We'll be coordinating with the U of M to have the state's voice on their work around the 50-year water plan that was introduced into in the legislative session this last session. And we'll be reporting back to the board on that in the coming months as that develops. And that's really a pretty short update from me on climate and water, and I'll pass it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Eric. So I'm Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno, and I am the State Pollinator Coordinator with Environmental Quality Board. And I'm just going to give you a brief highlight on the project that I lead, which is on pollinators. So EQB is the convener and lead of the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team, and this team works together to restore healthy, diverse pollinator populations in our state. Our current projects are developing an annual pollinator report. This happens every year. The interagency team works together to bring highlights on our efforts and on our progress. But this year, we're focusing mainly on the pollinator action framework that we've been working for the past 2 years to develop. So we'll be bringing in September to the board this pollinator action framework and our next steps for developing an implementation plan. The EQB convenes this interagency team. We have 10 state agencies that work with staff that works together to accomplish this goal. And yeah, we will be bringing some updates soon. We can have the next slide, please. I'm also taking over the reinvigorating of the genetically engineered organisms program, EQB. This is an area of work that EQB is starting to, it's not necessarily new, but it's starting to reinvigorate. And our main objectives are to help the board understand their authorities related to GEOs, that's short for genetically engineered organisms, and the likely areas of GEO use that will need review and permitting. So this is environmental review and permitting. And we will also be coming back to the board during spring to provide some recommendations to establish a future GEO regulatory program based on EQB. That's it for me. I think I will turn it back to our executive director, if I'm correct.
Yes. All right, thanks everybody. And just a brief ending up with some highlights from sort of the engagement and organizational side. I think Kayla mentioned this maybe, but we are continuing to work on a tribal relations policy, which we have a draft, and thank you to the board members who helped us do the preliminary draft. We're going to send it out hopefully this week to our tribal partners for further review and discussion with them about coordination and consultation. As I mentioned, we are going to start working towards an environmental congress sometimes in 2024, and how think about what we want to do there, and we'll be talking more about that, I'm sure, to come, but we will need to do a lot of work in fiscal 24 to get that planned, even if we don't end up having the event until fall of 2024. Operationally, we are working on a board handbook update for all of you. So new version for fiscal 24. The strategic plan updates, obviously, that we are going to talk about here in a minute. And also considering doing some board bylaws, you know, as we've been looking into and talking about operational things like signing agreements with the Attorney General's Office for Services or signing other kinds of agreements. There's not a lot of clarity written down in terms of who has what authorities and to enter in contracts. And so I would like us to have some bylaws to provide clarity in operations and authorities. So that's another item on our work plan for fiscal 24 is to consider that. And so I think then overall that is our broad overview of the work plan. You have plenty more detail in the packet. I think at this point, the plan was to ask for clarifying questions and then move to public input. So and we'll stop presenting, I think, at this point.
Yes, thank you, Executive Director Nuschler and Kayla and Eric and Rebecca for that update and presenting this. So yes, as the Executive Director mentioned, at this point, we're going to take questions from the board that are just clarifying questions, and then we'll do a public comment on this, having that input, and then we'll have further board discussions. So for questions, I see Commissioner Stroman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Daubenberger, and thanks to the staff team for the presentation. One question I had, I know there are, and I appreciate the FTE estimates for EQB staff. Did you do any estimates for the support needed from other agencies and sort of a roll up of support needed from tech reps or other folks?
Yeah, Commissioner Stroman, thank you. I know that we talked about that last month, and I think as we got into it, it just didn't feel like we had enough information to accurately estimate FTE counts in terms of how much time projects were going to take. And so we defaulted to sort of trying to explain with various projects, were they going to be asked just for review? Was there going to be a work group with actual work products expected, and to try to lay it out? But we just didn't feel like we had enough of a handle on exactly how their workloads are to try to make an estimate.
Thank you for that question. We'll next go to Public Member Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we go back to the slide on the ARIS recommendations?
We can just give me a moment here to, of course, the computer stopped showing me where everything was right when you asked that.
I just wanted to sort of clarify that the motion at the meeting is a little different than what's listed there, if I recall. Other members were there as well. That, and to clarify that, I think number 4, the motion was really to develop or have a plan for board development. As we discussed, these concepts were quite complex, and there would probably be some need as we go along to have some education for the board itself in order to make some informed decisions. So it's a little bit more than just stopping points or decision points being identified in my mind. And I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Public Member Nelson. And why don't will just keep
Chair
taking questions.
Daubenberger, can I just respond to that quick? Because
Sure,
I
go
think,
ahead, Commissioner Stroman.
I think, Member Nelson, those were two separate components, is my recollection, that the piece related to the work plan piece of the recommendation was to have some identified stopping points or phases so that the board could determine the scope. I think your question, the scope of, could we do half a project this year and, do half a project next year? Your question about board development was definitely part of our discussion. My recollection, it was separate from that particular piece in the motion. And what we asked staff to do, I think separately, we asked staff to put together a board learning and development plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. I see Public Member Nelson has his hand back up. So on the same line of discussion, let's go back to Public Member Nelson.
And the confusion on that may be mine, since I was the one who actually made the motion. That as long as there is something there, that there is some board development education, I am fine with that. But I just want to sort of point that out for other board members who may be a little bit intimidated by the scope of some of the things that are being discussed.
Madam Chair, if I may, and Board Member Nelson, you see in the packet for the strategic plan item, there's sort of a charter. And when I showed you those interlocking circles, it talks about project plans. And so certainly for some of these larger things, I do envision that once we kind of put together the project plan with some more framing, that would be something that we could certainly bring back to the board. And so as we move through, if there are specific things where you want to kind of see that project plan as we're getting things going, we'd be happy to do that, and we'd be planning to do that for some of the larger projects.
Thank you, Executive Director Nussler. So why don't we then go on to Vice Chair and Public Member Nelson, Martin, excuse me.
Thanks, Chair Daubenberger. This is one for Kayla. Kayla, you've talked about, in the context of decision criteria evaluation, the evaluation of cumulative effects. And I'm just curious, cumulative impacts. And I'm just curious how that relates to, or maybe it doesn't relate, but you know, in the legislation from this 2023 legislation, there's an extensive new section on charging MPCA to come up with a framework for cumulative impact analysis, but that one relating specifically to permits and environmental justice areas. Is there overlap between these two things, or are they just sort of using the same word, but they don't necessarily link to each other?
Kayla, do you want to take that? Thank you.
Certainly, I can start. Thank you, Board Member Martin. It's a great question, and I think that defining the difference between, you know, what court decisions have determined cumulative impacts versus cumulative potential effects could mean that is something that EQB does need to clarify, and I think need to put out some education on that as well. So long range, that's important to me, and I think that when we're looking just at applying that lens to the decision criteria, I'm thinking about it in a broader and umbrella term of potential effects that are accumulating in a broad sense, not in a strict court decided definition of the term. So yes, there is some overlap with what the Pollution Control Agency is starting on, and we are in conversation with them on that too. So hopefully we can find those areas of convergence. So I will, I don't know if Director Nuschler, if you have anything to add to that, give you an opportunity.
I think Kayla, you've said it well, and Board Member Martin, it's something we've looked into, that this cumulative potential effects, or the language in the environmental review rules, has been scoped very specifically by a court case in the past. And then there's this sort of general sense of cumulative impacts, cumulative effects that people are using. And I think parsing through those different things and figuring out what the scope can be and should be would be part of the project. Something I'm definitely still wrapping my head around.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. All right. Any other clarifying questions from board members? I am not seeing any hands up. So why don't we go move on then to the public comment on this item. And we have allotted about 20 minutes for public comment, but again, please raise your hand in Teams if you'd like to comment, and we'll call on those who have their hands raised in Teams. So, Eric Dahl, if I could ask you to go ahead and call on those with their hands up, and they can then unmute and speak.
All right, Chair Dobbenberger, thanks. I just promoted Paula Maccabee. You're the first comment. You can unmute now and give your comment. Should be able to click unmute.
All right, is that working now?
Yes, thank you.
Well, first I want to say thank you very much for allowing the public to speak, and apologize. I've been doing so many individual projects. I have come late to this discussion. So I'm going to give some comments which are more focused on work as a practitioner and maybe a little bit less on the exact details of the slides. And I think one of the concerns that I want to bring to your attention, and then you can figure out how to address it, is that it looks to me from my practice that the proponents and RGUs are likely to try and use climate as a new justification to shortchange, go quickly through scientific inquiry. And I see that in the mining area especially. And similarly, in the past, they've used the proponents have used the mantra of jobs to try and avoid considering alternatives or the narrow scope of minimization or mitigation. And I think that is something that we need to be thinking about all the time. And then there were some things that I wanted to bring to your attention. I think the idea of having a greenhouse gas calculator is a very positive idea, but I think it needs to you need to make sure that it includes issues such as carbon sequestration. If wetlands are destroyed, what is the impact? And also look at both the life cycle of the project and life cycle of the alternatives. For example, the total cost in terms of energy use of extracted minerals versus recycled minerals. Recycling a metallic copper, for example, takes about 10% of the energy of the life cycle of extracting. And I think looking at the calculator in terms of sequestration and looking at it in terms of the life cycle of alternatives, and also considering what are the benefits, and this is in the energy area, what are the benefits of decentralized versus centralized alternatives, or in the area of recycling, it's a decentralized versus a centralized alternative, and how that economic structure and locational structure may also have positive climate impacts. I think one of the big issues that I think that the EQB could really influence and would make a huge difference in science is to develop practices and guidances working with the RGUs so that the project proponents can't hide the scientific data they've already accomplished. And I was aware of this, particularly with the Twin Metals project, where some of the stakeholders and rights holders were trying to get information under the Data Practices Act from the Department of Natural Resources. And they learned that the DNR didn't even have the data because the mine was sort of withholding it until they wanted to get to the next stage of environmental review. And in the Talon Metals initial proposal, EAW, they basically said this information, whether it was hydrology, surface water flow, whatever it was, they said it will be available during the EIS. And it's clear from their filings with the stock exchange that they have a lot of that data. But what they're doing is holding it back so that stakeholders and rights holders, that's just how I refer to tribes, would not have the opportunity to have a long-term scientific analysis, that they have to react almost immediately to huge volumes. And changing practices to require that the documents be given to the RGUs, that the RGUs make them accessible online for stakeholders, rights holders, members of the public, I think would make a huge degree of difference in how not only how quickly things can progress, which I know is the legislative import, but how closely the environmental review will actually reflect its objective, which is to get the best scientific knowledge. And then finally, I think that if you're looking at mandatory categories, I think there are some things that should be mandatory. If there's an expansion of a mine, for example, there's no mandatory EIS. And that may be equally problematic for other projects. It's just that I've been doing nothing but mining for 14 years. But the initial project has an EIS. And then in case of taconite mining, the Peter Mitchell mine was a huge expansion of the pit. It went into a completely different rock formation with much higher concentrations of sulfate and minerals. And we were not part of that litigation, but the litigation was unsuccessful because there is a very, very high bar of ever doing another EIS. So I think both looking at the issue of project changes, expansions, and also if an EIS was done 40 years ago, revisiting it. So I think that this is a really good process that you're looking at how can environmental review be improved rather than, I think there's often a lot of political pressure just to make it go faster and be less substantive. And I really welcome the chance to discuss any of these issues in more detail. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that comment. All right. Can we go on to the next commenter?
All right, thanks, Chair Dobbenberger. We have Jill Crafton up next, and I will promote you. And just a reminder to all commenters, you have approximately 2 to 3 minutes for your full comment. You are now promoted, Jill, and can unmute yourself and give your comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric, and I thank you for your work on the climate and water action plan. I come at this from a water context. I've been on a watershed district board since 2009 and have seen a lot of best management practices that aren't really helping us solve some of our problems. And so since learning more about soil health, I've become aware of the importance of the water cycle. And I don't think you're greenhouse gas emissions pull into play the water vapor emissions that are in the air that actually, when you've got infiltration and that water cycle is actually functioning, can cool the local atmosphere. So it would be, I don't know if that would take direction from the legislature or not, but there's a whole other context when you've got water falling on soil sponges or soil with active life in it that recharges our groundwater and comes up through the plants and the trees as water vapor and actually cools, but it recharges our groundwater. You've got a system that actually supports pollinators, and that, I mean, so there's multiple benefits, and it touches multiple things. So it would be great to see us look at that. The thing that bothers me is the high temperatures. And I don't think we're realizing some of the sources of what's causing the high temperatures. That's why I bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Next commenter, go to you, Eric, for the next commenter.
All right, thank you, Chair Dobbenberger. Next, we have Claire M. Olson. You are promoted and you can unmute yourself.
Hello, my name is Claire. I'd like to start by thanking you for listening to the public and for the work you've already done to improve Minnesota's environmental review program. I think you've outlined some really critical goals in the 2024 work plan. I especially support the mandatory categories report and the decision criteria evaluation so that we can implement some of the top ideas prioritized by the EQB in the 2023 continuous improvement report, like establishing threshold criteria for significance of impact and requiring full life cycle analysis of developments. I work as a science teacher with elementary school students during the summer, and we end up talking about wildfires, air quality, why they can't go outside as much anymore. And I want to be able to tell them that this isn't something they'll have to get used to, and that their leaders are doing everything in their power to fix the problem. That's why I feel it's so urgent that we treat these changes to the environmental review system as urgent, and we make sure the EQB has all the resources it needs to get this work done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Eric, next commenter.
All right, thank you, Chair Dobbenberger. Next commenter is Willis Matson. Go ahead, Willis. You can unmute yourself and you're up next.
Thank you for allowing public comments. The point of order before you start my stop clock, the 2 to 3 minutes we have here and the written comments are vastly insufficient to delve into the nuances of the problems that we have with environmental review and the solutions that we have suggested. So in our letter from the Isaac Walton League, we requested special staff meetings and possibly time at the next regular board meeting to elucidate those. So with that, I will begin my oral comments. My name is Willis Matson. I'm a professional ecologist with over 50 years of environmental review experience. I'm here representing the Isaac Walton League. Thousands of scientists from all over the globe are warning that our planet is poised to pass several climate and biodiversity tipping points as the cumulative results of misguided human activity. They tell us that course corrections are urgently needed, but because regulatory and environmental review, as currently practiced, do not properly account for cumulative effects, human impacts are allowed to keep mounting. The way seemingly insignificant environmental impacts can accumulate to become highly significant have been difficult for most, if not all, RGUs to understand in scientific terms. So allow me to use the following analogy that reflects both the nature of cumulative effects and the urgency for applying solutions. Your child is on a bowling team bus on a mountainous road, returning from a winter tournament in a neighboring city. Student bowling balls are all safely contained in a long floor-mounted rack along the aisle to prevent them from being dangerously tossed about should there be an accident. At a stop sign, the front bowling ball breaks through the rack's end gate and rolls the full length of the bus, where it delights the students by crashing into the coach's beaten up old lunchbox on the floor. The assistant coach, who's sitting near the ball rack, retrieves and replaces it, and once again secures the end gate. Everything seems fine because the damage is minor and can easily be fixed by pounding out the new dent. Suddenly, the bus veers off the snow-covered highway. It crashes through a barrier and is left teetering over a chasm. The driver's disabled, but the coach recognizes the bus's delicate balance that is standing between them and the catastrophe and shouts, "Don't move. We don't dare rock the bus or we'll tip." At that moment, the same bowling ball suddenly breaks through the end gate again and rolls forward toward the front of the bus. Your child and all her teammates are frozen in terror, unable to move or stop the ball. Kerthunk, the ball hits the front. In the eerie silence that follows, the bus creaks as it teeters first forward and then back, but it doesn't flip. Then,
And Mr.
to everyone's
Mattson, I need you to wrap up. You're over 3 minutes now.
Yep, I'm one paragraph away. A second ball slowly rolls to the front of the rack. The assistant coach's white-knuckled hands are frozen to the safety bar in the front seat in front of her, and she cannot move to catch the second ball before it breaks loose and rolls all the way to the front of the bus. Kerthunk. The bus creaks and teeters forward again, but to everyone's relief, it still rocks back and doesn't tip. My last sentence. But then the unthinkable happens. More balls start to roll off the rack and head for the front of the bus. One after the other, they hit. Kerthunk, kerthunk, kerthunk.
Thank you, Mr. Mattson, for those comments. Okay, Eric, next commenter.
All right, thank you, Chair. We have Zoe Peterson next. Go ahead, Zoe, you're promoted and you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Hopefully.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Zoe Peterson. I'm making a statement today to advocate for urgency and accountability in our practices here. I'm 21 years old. I'm young. I'm in college. I'm learning, discovering myself, discovering the world around me, but I'm also discovering an immense amount of fear. Our changing climate has taken the joy of looking to the future and has replaced it with dread. I watch each development project in Minnesota with concern, wondering how projects like new roadways and pipelines will affect the health of my water, my air, my soil, and the planet that we all live on, and that these impacts will have an effect for many, many years. It is from this position of concern that I ask you to make change and to do so as soon as possible. I am excited to see that the Environmental Quality Board is accounting for calculating lifetime greenhouse gas emissions. This move will hold all developers accountable to their impacts on my future and the futures of all Minnesota youth. Thank you.
All right, Chair Daubenberger. Next up, we have Mike Tauber. Mike, you are promoted and can unmute yourself.
My name is Mike Tauber. I live in the Pineland Sands of northern Minnesota. In the short time I am allowed to speak in front of this board, I will share personal experiences that are a direct result of regulatory capture of the agencies that are represented here today. These experiences demonstrate the need for improvements in environmental review. A decade ago, my family's home and those of my neighbors were surrounded by corporate woodlots in the Pineland Sands. Many of these forests have since been removed en masse and replaced by corporate agriculture. These forest-to-field conversions were predicted well ahead of time during multiple attempts at environmental review, predicted to contaminate drinking water, aquifers, and surface waters, while at the same time causing water table depletions of 8 to 12 feet in our neighborhood. We have indeed seen these predictions come true despite emphatically asking this board and even one of the commissioners here today to not issue permits for such activity. We have spent a lot of time studying and aggregating information generated by Minnesota regulatory agencies as well as information from experts outside the Pineland Sands region. We have offered all of this information back to these same agencies and the EQB only to see Minnesota rules, statutes, and laws ignored in favor of developments proffered by politically connected corporate interests. People in our neighborhood now listen with dread to helicopters coming from distance to spray known carcinogens on crops grown in newly created deserts. This same activity has happened for years next to the children in the Pineland Point School on the White Earth Reservation. Like many thousands of people in Minnesota who live next to chemical agriculture, we now understand what it is like to have drinking water contaminated by chemicals and watch surface waters in our area disappear with the inception of massive water appropriations for irrigation. Today, I ask this board to proceed with determination in the process of reclaiming Minnesota's resources from the corporate interests that have brought us all to the brink of events that, if allowed to occur, would not bode well even for the corporations that currently hold sway. I and many others refuse to believe it is too late, and we now offer a collaborative hand to members of the EQB. Thank you.
Thank you. Next
All right.
presenter, Eric.
All right, up next we have Amy Bralier. I hope I pronounced that right, and you are now promoted and can unmute yourself, Amy. Amy, we can't hear you. And I'll have to click the little microphone button to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Amy
There we go.
Brawley here. Sorry about that. Never used Microsoft Team. Anyway, quickly, here today from North Central Minnesota, share many of the same concerns as the gentleman before me. But thank you for having us with public comments. And I noticed, please establish scientific expert panel oversights, as is one of your highlighted things you're going to do, and the full life cycle assessment of projects, the life cycle of greenhouse emissions. And then I know Paula McAbee talked about the calculator, and also RGUs, if they could make docs accessible online. I'm an older one here, 62, but very involved in the support of our water here in North Central Minnesota, and grave concerns that things were not looked into before a large pipeline came in, and now we're having aquifer breaches and things are being discovered. So grateful that you're trying to coordinate everything or a lot more now. So appreciate that, and may it make a better world for our children and their children.
All right. Next up, we have Jill Crawford. You are now promoted, Jill. You can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm a resident of Duluth, and I'm commenting on the agenda item regarding Duluth's RGU. Is now a time to be able to do that? I had to join a little late.
No, that should be held for public comment at the end. This public comment period is specific to the work plan.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. Just wanted to double check.
Thank you.
Okay. We have one more, and I don't have a name. It is just under guest, and I've promoted guest, and you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I will have to reserve my comments also for the public portion. Thank you.
Okay, and we did just get another public commenter, and that is Joy Anderson. Go ahead, Joy, you can unmute yourself. We can't hear you yet, Joy. It looks like you're unmuted, so I'm not sure. Appears the muting, unmuting isn't working. Perhaps you could leave and rejoin the meeting and that might work, or maybe it's some hardware issue on your computer. So with that, we don't have any more public comment right now for this item. Looks like Joy will try and talk during the regular public comment. Oh, actually, now we do have another and that is Sarah Wolf. Go ahead, Sarah, you are now promoted. You can unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. And I love how you are giving promotions. That is fabulous. I really want to apologize because I was not able to be here for this part of the meeting until just a couple moments ago. So I, of course, worry about making a comment when I haven't heard everything that's gone before. But having tracked the process to the degree that I have, I just want to really uplift the need for incorporating life cycle emissions into the review processes that we have and say that that is an urgent piece of the puzzle that I hope can become reflected as a priority in the work that the EQB is doing. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
All right, Chair Daubenberger, Joy Anderson has returned. We could try again and see if she's
Go
able
ahead.
you're ready. You can unmute now, Joy. We can try it again. Unfortunately, it seems like you're unmuted, but we're still not hearing you. There is a phone number you can call into, I believe. Try and put that in the text. I don't have it memorized here. With that, Chair Daubenberger, we don't have any more commenters at this time.
All right, thank you. Thank you for going through the commenters for us, Eric, and thank you all for commenting on this. So now this is the time we'll have board discussion on this topic on the work plan. And I regret I do need to step away for the rest of the meeting. So Vice Chair and Public Member Martin, if you would please lead the discussion on this item, and appreciate everybody's thoughtful discussion that you'll be having on this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair Daubenberger. So yes, our next item, I wanted to turn to the board members, and if you have responses either to Director Nussler's presentation or to any of the public comments, now's the time for that. And then I think discussion first, and then we'll move to a vote on approval of the organizational work plan. So let me first give folks a chance to raise your hand or just jump right in if there's discussion. Commissioner Stroman.
Thank you, Chair Martin. And a couple thoughts I will just share. I think there's no doubt, and we had this same discussion in ERIS, that all of this work is really important. And so, I want to recognize that. I also, in response to some of the public comments, will reiterate something we also talked about at ERIS, which is as important as the EQB's work is around climate and a number of the other issues raised, I also want to emphasize that it isn't the only place that work to address those issues is happening, that many of the agencies that are part of the EQB are also part of the state's climate subcabinet and are working with many of the organizations across the state, some of the ones who had representatives presenting today to work on solutions to those issues. And so I just do want folks to know that we are hearing the importance, we are hearing the sense of urgency, we share that. And I just also want to note that all of that work is not at the feet of the EQB, that work is broader. The other thing that I will just note here, and probably not a surprise, as I made some of these comments as we were discussing the environmental review portion, and my concern relates to the question I asked earlier about the estimates of agency time needed. But as I noted, many of these projects require the same expertise from agencies, and so I look at this, and as I have talked with my team here, I am not confident that we can provide the agency support to all of these activities at the level that it will be required to do these things as they deserve. So, I would either ask that we have some discussion around some prioritization, or I think the other alternative, if the board desires to move forward with all of these things, is that we have some path for our agency tech reps to work with Director Nuschler and her staff to appropriately scale the agency time. And I want to be very clear, it's not a reluctance to dedicate time or to share staff resources. Our folks are simply tapped too. We all got a lot more work on our plate as a result of the last legislative session. The same areas that EQB is focused on are the same areas where DNR is digging in, and the same areas where our workload just does not support a vast number and of additional projects. And as much as we try to keep a robust staff, we can't always hire as many people as we want. So I just want to be really clear. It's not a reluctance. It is a reality that I face, and I just can't in good conscience commit staff resources that I don't have. So I do think if the board is committed to all of this, there is a process by which our tech reps can work with Director Nuschler to appropriately scale that. I just don't want to disappoint the board or disappoint the public down the road when we can't actually fulfill some of the work.
Thanks, Commissioner Stroman.
Thank you.
Director Nuschler, do you have an immediate response to that, or?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think, it gets back also to what I said previously to Board Member Nelson, and I think it's responsive somewhat to Mr. Mattson's comments as well. I think what we can do is if these items, all the items on the work plan are important, particularly with the ones that have the interagency processes that are larger, where many of them we envision we would be building out some more extensive engagement processes where we would take the details of, we think there should be a mandatory category for mine expansion. We think there should be this, level of detail. What we can do is we can work on project plans that more detail all of the needs and the timelines and bring those back. We'll work with the tech reps on them and bring those back and sort of review them for the larger projects. As well as if the board is interested, we can be a little more mindful about doing some reporting out on the whole work plan or pieces of the work plan throughout the fiscal year to all of you, if that would be helpful and if that would address your concern, Commissioner Stroman.
Commissioner Stroman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Martin and Director Nuschler. Yeah, I mean, I think those greater details would be helpful. I just want to be clear, like, I think that needs to happen at the board level, and I believe you said this also with the tech reps, so that things are scaled appropriately to the capacity at which they believe they can contribute to the efforts of the EQB, and also not take away from the capacity of DNR as an RGU to fulfill our responsibilities around environmental review. Clearly, that would not serve anyone. So that as long as there is as I said, there's two ways we can take things off the plate, or we can move them forward. And as you're developing plans, make sure they're scoped and scaled accordingly, and we can adjust if need be. But I just want to make sure that our staff, our tech reps in particular, are included in that conversation.
Just a question of clarification to you, Commissioner Stroman. Since our next thing is to vote on a resolution about adopting this work plan, are you saying you don't feel ready to vote on that, or that you you could be ready to vote on that, but you need to know that that prioritization and coordination is going to happen after that.
Yes, what I was saying is I would be comfortable moving this forward as long as that conversation can happen between Director Nuschler and her staff and the tech reps to make sure that within the more specific plans of this, we are not overcommitting their time and overpromising what we can deliver.
Comments or questions from any other board members? Not seeing any. Can I move us toward a vote on the resolution? This resolution is on page 27 of your packet. And it's basically just directing Executive Director Nuschler to implement the organizational work plan, manage staff and budget resources accordingly, including executing any contracts needed to perform the work indicated. Any discussion on this?
I'll move that resolution, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Member Kronos-Duberg. Is there a second?
Member Katzenberger will second.
Thanks, Member Katzenberger. Any further discussion? Commissioner Stroman, is your hand up again? I can't tell it.
It is, sorry. I just want to clarify whether the members who made the motion and Director Nuschler believe that my request is embedded in that, in the direction that Director Nuschler work on the allocation of staff and financial resources, or whether there is something that needs to be added as an addendum.
Mr. Chair, that was my intention, was to incorporate that discussion.
And my second could also include that. So it'd be a motion to approve the resolution as written with Commissioner Stroman's comments attached.
Agreed.
Are you comfortable with that, or would you like to have the those words added to the?
No, that makes me comfortable. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, if no further discussion, I think Director Nuschler can call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. So voting on approving the resolution, Commissioner Arnold, I believe is not present. Board Member Bakken.
In favor.
Board Member Bauerkemper.
I'm a yes vote.
Commissioner Christensen.
Yes, thank you.
The Commissioner Cunningham is not present. And Commissioner Daubenberger also is not present. Board Member Foster.
Yes.
Board Member Hintz. Board Member Hintz still on? Board Member Holman.
Aye.
Board Member Katzenberger.
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler, I believe is not present. Board Member Koner-Steenberg.
Yes.
Board Member Martin.
Yes.
Board Member Nelson.
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson, not present. Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
And Commissioner Verelek, I believe is not present. Circling back to, do we have Board Member Hintz? Okay. Thank you, Chair. We do have 10 yes votes, so the I guess, I don't know, I guess you get to say whether 10 yes votes approval or
With 10
not.
yes votes, The resolution passes. Thank you. So our next agenda item is to go back to Executive Director Nushka for an overview of the strategic plan process.
Okay, thank you all, and I will echo my thanks to the commenters for all their comments, and we will keep them in mind as we move forward. And I do want to talk a little bit, and excuse me as I'm going to fly through some slides to get to the rest of the presentation here, to talk about the plan for the EQB strategic plan review. The current strategic plan for the EQB was developed in 2018 in September and covers 5 years. It contains a purpose, guiding principles, mission, priority, results, and potential strategies. And in order to sort of revise and update that, what we're really anticipating is a focused and moderate revision that looks at the mission, the priority results, which I showed a little bit earlier, and the strategies for getting to those priority results. There's a lot of language around the strategic plan that talks about what we do and how we do it that's related, but kind of expresses things in different ways. Talks about our unique contribution being the ability to bring multiple state agencies and the public together. Talks about being a forum for leadership and coordination, leading interagency results to advance engagement and facilitate informed decision-making. A lot of those could sort of be seen as mission statements, but they take a little different frame on things that I think it would be helpful for us to look at. The priority results, as we talked about, speak to a really broad range of work, some of which isn't covered in those mission statement words. And so my goal for us in doing this revision and to kind of think about what we have, what can we leverage from what we already have to guide our decision-making and our actions for the next 5-year planning cycle, is that we come up with a revised plan that clearly expresses our particular role, identifies the outcomes that we want to achieve, and sets forth a small number of strategies that we believe will support and lead to the identified outcomes. So we would really try to dig into those 3 pieces: the mission, the results, and the strategies. I think the purpose, the current strategic plan articulates a purpose, but in some ways not very clearly. I was reading some materials and I was really struck by these words about strategy is what links capabilities and aspirations, and that doing this strategizing or the strategic planning is to really deliberately align our aspirations and our capabilities to figure out how we can achieve them within a given context. I think that really speaks to what we were just talking about in terms of all of the things we could do, and but the capabilities and the capacity that we have. And so just this is really, like I said, I was reading this and it just really struck me, that linkage between capabilities and aspirations being what we should try to accomplish with a strategic plan. Why do we do that? As I said, I think that provides that sort of sense, provides us with a bit more of a definite purpose than we have here. The current purpose is a little bit broad. I think it says it's flexible enough to accommodate emerging issues and shifting priorities. And while that's always true, I think if absolutely any piece of work could fit into our strategic plan, then our plan probably isn't strategic enough. It's probably a little too vague. And so what I'd like us to come out of this with is a strategic plan that really defines our priorities in order to guide the work that we do, that it provides some clear structure for our choices about what we do, and that we work to set out some really specific strategies and not just possible ones, that we try to refine them. We don't often in strategic plans, there's a mission, a vision, and values. A mission statement really should define and describe an organization's specific and unique purpose, what it does, and the outcomes it's striving for. And I think someone reading the mission statement really should be able to identify the organization and not confuse it with another organization. And so as part of revising our strategic plan, I'm going to suggest that we review our mission statement, which is on the screen here, and make sure it meets our needs and describes the unique role that EQB plays in Minnesota's environmental governance, and really respect our specific way of contributing to that. If anyone's interested, some of that concept comes from a book by Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering that I've been reading that's very interesting. I think I might have slipped a. Sorry, I'm losing my paperwork here, and I thought I skipped a slide, but I guess not. All right, so this is again the priority results in the strategic plan. And I think one of the questions here that we want to ask ourselves is whether these priority results fully and generally represent our goals and our aspirations for the EQB. And if not, what kind of changes do we need to make to them? For example, nothing in here specifically speaks to climate, which I think we're hearing from our own work with the state agencies and from our commenters here is really an important issue. It may fit into some of these other ones, but is it worth calling out as a priority result? We also did a lot of work in the continuous improvement process defining effective environmental review. Maybe we want to consider updating our priority results in that area to take into account that language that we did a lot of discussion about. And maybe priority results isn't the right word. Maybe we're going to call them something else. I'm not sure about that one. The current version of the strategic plan, which is in your packet, the long version, includes several potential strategies under each priority result. They're not called out in the short version, and there are between 4 and 7 for each one. And reading over them, I think they overlap. They're fairly broad. I know, again, I think what my goal would be for us to work together to develop more specific strategies to support each priority result. That we have no more than 3 for each priority result or outcome, and that they really are specific enough to point us towards key work that would achieve each result. Again, aligning our capabilities with our aspirations. Once we completed the revision, we can move forward with implementation, including using the strategies to guide our work plan, to develop indicators and metrics, further as to whether we're implementing a strategies and achieving results, to consider some regular reporting. That is mentioned in the current plan, that there'd be some kind of reporting protocol to measure progress and engagement, environmental review, and collaborative policy development. But I haven't found evidence of there being any of those protocols, and those only cover very few parts of the current priority results. So that's an overview with the sort of targeted outcomes that I would like to achieve. The sort of general path here would be that at the probably October or November board meeting, we would do some facilitated work to gather input on the mission and on the big picture priority results. I've been working with the MPCA's Organizational Improvement Unit, who provides support to us and to many folks doing strategic planning and other kind of planning, and they are going to help do this facilitation. So after that event, I would work with them to draft the mission and the outcomes and priority results. Then we'd review that, and we would have another facilitated process probably in January to gather input on specific strategies to fit each outcome, and then compile a draft strategic plan, review that with you all, and then release it for public engagement and get some input using Engagement HQ, which is an online platform, or other strategies to work with those who are interested in our work, like all the folks who are here today, to see if it's reflecting what they want us to do and get that input. And then so looking that we would have a final revised updated plan in about April or May. As I said, hopefully this would be a pretty targeted approach to those 3 specific areas with input from all of you. And I would like to get input from the tech reps as well, as they really know our work, but keeping in mind Commissioner Stroman and all the other commissioners' concerns about capacity, hoping those can be kind of quick hit one-off workshops to get those input. And most of the drafting of the plan would be done by myself and the EQB staff. So that's my hope and my plan for the plan. And to get more input from all of you. And I have, sorry, lost all the slides. Okay. Managing multiple slides there. So there would be more to come on that and the process starting in October or November. And I am happy to take any questions.
Sorry about that. Any questions from board members? Okay, well, thank you. Look forward to that process. Be very interesting to go through together. Our next agenda item is another public comment time. And I think this is, maybe you can help me here, Eric. Is this on the strategic plan proposal or is it just on any topic that's been discussed? I believe it's the latter.
Thank you, Chair Martin. I believe it's the latter as well, but I'll let Executive Director Nuschler let me know if that's not correct.
Yes, Chair, I think at this time, any comments that folks want to make that aren't related, that weren't covered in the work plan item and that aren't related to work plan, but any other items, we will be happy to take that comment.
Great. And Eric, do you have, I'll let you let me know if you've got folks in the queue. I know we do have a couple.
Okay, yep, I've got right now I have one, and that is Paula Maccabee, and you are now promoted, Paula, and you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. This is Paula Maccabee, and I really appreciate the effort to try and look at more strategically at what the EQB can be doing to protect the environment. And I guess the first question I would have is whether the EQB has the freedom to develop aspirations which were based on, and I'm old enough to know what happened at the foundation of the EQB. The initial impetus for the EQB was to study environmental issues across departments. It was not to try and balance environment and economics. There are other parts of government that encourage economic development of it. And I'm wondering, does the EQB have the flexibility to develop aspirations that are going back to the initial vision of the Environmental Quality Board, rather than the kind of political pressure that has whittled away those objectives? And I think there's probably a lot of understanding now about the climate crisis and the crisis about water that might support more flexibility. And then the second issue I want to raise, and I think I put it in the chat, is that I think it would be really important to start this process, rather than having the community talk at the end, to start the process by asking community members how they feel environmental review has either worked or not worked, with some real concrete specifics, so that you can figure out what is the best way to deal with the situation, and also what policy documents over the years that EQB has either led or spearheaded or written have been most meaningful or helpful in bringing people in a new direction. And I think having that community input up front would be really important. And my aspiration is that the EQB would set guidelines for environmental review that return it to the concept that governmental decisions need to be made on the basis of environmental and scientific evidence, rather than other factors which are jobs or politics. And also that the EQB would study and make really concrete policy recommendations on existential issues for climate, water, lands, and living beings that cross silos of departments and can't, even if the other departments really are important partners that can't be done within another department. So thank you so much for the opportunity to comment. That's it.
Thanks very much for that comment.
All right, next up, Chair Martin, we have Joy Anderson. Go ahead, Joy, you can unmute yourself. Unfortunately, Joy, we still can't hear you. Sorry about that. Oh.
Sorry, Eric, I'm going to interrupt. Chair Martin, I'm not sure what's going on with Ms. Anderson's sound, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind if this might be a time where we could let her put it in the chat, and then perhaps Eric could read the comment once she's typed it. That might be, I just feel bad that for some reason the technology is not working here. If that would be okay with you, perhaps we could try that. We'll move on to the other comment.
Yeah, that sounds like a good option. Joy, if you'd like to put your comment in the chat, we'll capture it. I believe also, as Eric mentioned earlier, there is a phone number, and I don't know if staff could put that in the chat. That might be a way to, if we've got someone else queued up, that Joy could try again.
Okay, first I'll move next to Jill Crawford as the next commenter. Go ahead, Jill, you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. As I said previously, I'm a resident of Duluth and I'm commenting on the agenda item regarding Duluth RGU. First, I definitely want to acknowledge Board Member Bauer Kemper and thank him for taking the time to understand the nuances of this situation and for recommending action. Based on the conversation that occurred earlier today, I want to just comment on two items. First, because of what is being called a misinterpretation of an email, I need you to all be aware that Minnesota citizens have had to pay thousands of dollars and have spent hundreds of hours in an attempt to stop this negative precedent from being created within the EQB. Unfortunately, we will likely be unsuccessful because of the $1.6 million bond set against us, which is a direct outcome of this communication from the Environmental Quality Board. But to citizens right now, myself included, we're doing more than any government body has to keep this negative precedent from being set within your organization. And I'm fairly confident that none of you are comfortable with or agree with the loophole Duluth has created. It's not in the character or the mission of the EQB. And with that said, Commissioner Strawman, I have to comment to your comments regarding being sensitive to the AG's time and budget, because that is simply unfair given the amount of time and money that we have spent to try to address this issue in some degree on your behalf. And I want to make sure that we outline what these precedents are. Because the EQB's communication, the precedent is currently being set that a developer can circumnavigate the state statutes to reverse a decision in their favor. In addition to this, Duluth has completely undermined your citizen petition process. That process is already very difficult for any citizen to create a successful petition, but now Duluth has created an outcome that intimidates that public participation. If this isn't a scenario for the AG and the EQB to get involved in, I'm really not sure what else would be. The EQB subdivision 10 is written entirely for the board to be able to address circumstances such as this. So therefore, I have to plead that you don't wait a month to get your answers. A special meeting can be and should be called to address this, especially since this has been going on since April. And we are literally out of time to stop this destruction from happening and this precedent from being set. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Next commenter is Willis Matson. Go ahead, Willis. You can unmute yourself. currently still muted, Wilson. Or Willis, sorry. There you go.
All right. Thank you. I'm sorry. Thanks for an opportunity to comment again. I'll be directing your attention to the strategic plan and the mission statement. I believe it's appropriate to revisit what you have in the mission statement. And as guidance, I would suggest you go directly to the enabling legislation in MEPA itself. It has excellent aspirational language there that should set the template for your mission statement. Secondly, your strategic plan espouses a robust public participation plan. And I have to say that participating in it now in this process has been very inhibiting. There's not been a robust opportunity for public involvement. I feel really constrained by the written comment requirement and by the 2 to 3 minute oral comment. These issues, and I'm a professional ecologist and a learned, practiced environmental review professional. I can tell you that the comments that need to be made, need to be heard, and changes to be done cannot be capsulized in these narrow opportunities for comment. And then finally, with regard to staff and the strategic and the work plan. The state agencies, as Commissioner from DNR pointed out, are strapped for the professional experts they have. Yet the EQB has failed to exercise the directive from the legislature to create expert panels that could function voluntarily without salary and provide tremendous amount of expertise to the tasks at hand that you have, especially with regard to vetting the science. I can speak from 50 years of experience that the science that's applied to environmental review, especially with regard to determining what is a significant or not a significant impact, is paltry and poor. I can't use stronger words than that without resorting to expletives. We must have a higher integrity science in order to curb the trends we have in losses of biodiversity and climate science. Every RGU claims their project does not have a significant adverse effect. And as the bowling balls in my little analogy show, these little effects accumulate. That's how we got into a climate crisis. Unless we can use environmental review to inform project proposers and RGUs to make better choices, then it's not functioning. And the barrier, of course, is the EAWs. The EAW has been allowed to filter out every critical look at alternatives. Now, when it comes to climate and biodiversity, we must be looking at alternatives. So the science, please establish a science advisory panel. And I'd like to work with staff as to how that can be done that emulates the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and how that functions immune from political influence with high quality science. So thanks for the opportunity to make those suggestions.
Thanks, Mr. Madison.
Okay, next up we have the person named Guest. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Comment.
Hi there, and thank you for allowing public comment. My name is Becca Mullenberg. I am the representative of the Citizens Petition for an EAW for the hotel project in Duluth. Coming from my point of view, and to have done so much research, having spent countless hours gathering information for the reasons this hotel deserves more scrutiny through an EAW, and then to have an EAW requirement made by the RGU thrown out because the developer was allowed to appeal to the wrong body after the decision was noticed in the monitor, does appear to go against Minnesota statutes, rules, and city ordinances. We believe that if there ever was a situation for the EQB to intervene, now is the time. By not intervening in the long term, we believe it would lead to the dissolution of the citizens' petition for an EAW. And in the short term, 6 acres of forested land on a site which is next to Miller Creek in Duluth and amongst wetlands will be cleared before a decision is made by the Court of Appeals. There was some clearing of the forest that occurred yesterday. And for those of you who aren't aware, Duluth City Council, who was not the RGU, but were responsible for overturning the EAW requirement, voted to allow the development to progress, even while the decision is being looked at by the Court of Appeals. After that land is cleared, and if the courts rule that the EAW should be reinstated, how can a proper EAW be done when the land has been destroyed? I mentioned a couple sentences ago that the citizens' petition for an EAW will probably no longer exist should there be no action on this by the EQB. And that's because when developers and lawyers discover that the city of Duluth appealed an RGU's decision to a body that was not the Court of Appeals, and after publication in the Monitor, I can't see how any other person or group in their right mind would ever take on a citizen's petition for an EAW, knowing it could be overturned by a non-RGU without any consequences. In speaking and wrapping up for approximately 250 Minnesotans who signed our petition and who believe the requirement for an EAW was proper as decided by the RGU, we are in support of you asking the Attorney General's office to look into this matter, and the time to intervene is now. Thank you for your time.
All right. Next up, we have Sarah Wolf. Go ahead, Sarah. You can unmute yourself.
Hi. I just want to really acknowledge that it's hard to hop back and forth between topics, and I appreciate the compelling speakers that have gone before me, including the one just before me. So thank you. You know, I was really encouraged at the July meeting of the ARIS group from the staff comments and documents supporting that meeting, and from comments from the public that were emphasizing important topics. And the 3 I'll name would be the scientific integrity and accountability. Secondly, the inclusion of a project's life cycle emissions, including those emissions outside of the state that are realized. And then looking at how much is too much when it might come to environmental impacts. And I want to acknowledge that as I followed this, I wasn't here as part of the first part of the meeting, and I was hoping I might ask a question because I think I have a comment, but I want to be sure it's well placed. And that question is just under the current work plan that was adopted just minutes ago. When will life cycle emissions be made part of the calculation for EIS and other aspects of environmental review? Is that a question I could ask and see if there's an answer before I have one final comment?
Thanks, Ms. Wolf. I don't know, Director Nussler, is that something that you can address? It may not be known yet exactly how long that process is.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can do my best. I think, you know, as I noted, we have updated the climate guidance recently, and then we have this plan to develop tools and more guidance for incorporating consideration of climate impacts into the EAW. And so I think we would And I'm trying to figure out how to say this because we are envisioning that there will be a contracting process for doing the calculations. And when that is a contracting process, that is not public, and we can't talk about what's going to go into the contract before we issue the request for proposals. So I guess what I would say is that we are committed to considering and thinking about how it can be included in that piece of the guidance. I think the question, the life cycle analysis could be considered in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different ones of these projects, whether that be the decision criteria, how it may play into the mandatory categories. And so it could be considered in a number of places. I hope that's helpful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely it is. I think that's really helpful. And you're getting at the concern that I had and am trying to sort out, which is I understand, I believe that the legislature has appropriated some money and done a mandate about making sure we get the calculator, the GHG emissions calculator kind of created, which is wonderful. But I think it's essential that calculator include the life cycle emissions piece. And so I would hate to see that the work of creating the calculation system doesn't include that critical component. And it wasn't obvious to me from the work plan that was just approved whether this body has said, yes, life cycle emissions are what we should be taking into account. And therefore that will be part of what we're asking the calculator to calculate. And that will be part of these other aspects. And so that's my concern. I hope that as we're going forward and making these tools, that they're incorporating all the things we need in that calculation. And I appreciate what you've said so far. I don't know that I have clarity about it. It feels a little vague to me. And I'd feel much comforted to know that life cycle emissions would in fact be part of what the calculator was going to calculate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Mark. Go ahead, Mark, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I've unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you.
My name is Mark Baker. I'm also from Duluth. I submitted a comment for your agenda today. I will not read the entire comment again because I'm sure you have read it, but I will review it and sum it up in as short a manner as I can. As has been mentioned by other commenters, in the Duluth case here, we have a city and a developer that has totally and completely eviscerated its own ordinances, the state rules, state statutes regarding environmental review. And when in doing this, and in the petitioner's attempts to get the EQB to make some comment or intervene in this clearly obvious circumvention that has been attempted by the city, they have received nothing but stonewalling. In summary, what the city tried to do was substitute a different agency of the city for the RGU that was designated in city ordinance, and which the city itself communicated to the EQB as who the RGU is. They then voted and reversed the decision of the RGU, which is the Planning Commission, and then when presented with this evidence, which is clear as day, EQB staff has just chosen and said, we can't intervene. There's not anything we can do. I think the comments of the other people and the commission member are spot on. This is the time to intervene. It is not a month from now, it is today. And you have every right to intervene in this matter under subdivision 10 of the state code. I thank you for your time and for listening to my comment.
Thanks, Mr. Baker. Eric, do you
All
have
right.
others?
I don't have others, Chair Martin, but I do have Joy Anderson's written comment that I can read now for you all. It's in the
Yes,
chat.
please.
Okay, so from Joy Anderson, MCEA. Hopefully I can get through this without stumbling. Thank you for taking the comment, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. As you may have heard, many people are concerned with how environmental review is working in Minnesota right now and want to make it better, not for RGUs and project proponents, but for the public. As you look to update criteria to determine the potential for significant environmental effects, it needs to be done to accomplish the purposes of MEPA, to promote efforts to prevent and eliminate damage to the environment. Right now, an EIS is almost never ordered based on the potential for significant environmental effects. I believe there have been none in the last 3 years. This means the alternatives analysis, which is supposed to be at the heart of MEPA, is missed. Without alternatives, the public and RGU don't get to see whether there are better ways to build a project. As this process moves forward, I ask that these criteria be revised in a way that makes it clear to RGUs that when there is actually the potential for significant environmental effects, they do order an EIS. Thank you for your patience and for taking my comment in the chat. And that's Joy Anderson's comment.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Anderson.
And I don't see any other comments, Chair Martin, at this time, or any hands raised.
Just a second in case there's any others. Otherwise, I think that's the last item on our agenda, so we can, unless there's anything else, Director Nussler. Okay. Thank you to all the board members and all the members of the public for your participation. Sorry, are you signaling?
I saw a hand from board member Bauer Kemper.
Oh, I'm sorry. Member Bauer Kemper, sorry about that.
Well, that's fine. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Nick. So Catherine, can you, so earlier when we sort of transitioned out of the initial conversation about the situation in Duluth, Chair Daubenberger asked you to circle back to figure out what the next steps are. Do you have an idea of what those are? You know, I don't feel like we have thorough clarity on the timeline here and what's necessary in relation to the meeting next month, in relation to the ongoing case right now. So I'm wondering if you can give us some sense of what you expect, what you're going to ask the AG's office, and I'll also invite any good ideas from other board members of how we might approach this in a reasonable way. Thanks.
Yeah, board member Bauer Kemper, what I wrote down, my general sense was that I think at minimum, we wanted to ask for an interpretation of kind of your question about sort of, is it been consistent practice that a notice published in the Monitor represents sort of a final agency action? And so essentially, can the local government, can the RGU, which is, as I say, local government and RGU, I realize that itself is a question of contention in this particular issue. Can a local government hear an appeal administratively of an already noticed opinion? I think one of the questions you all had is to sort of, how do we get essentially an answer to what is the law in that sense? And my understanding is we can make a request to the Attorney General's office to make a formal statement on that matter. One of the things that I have that I don't understand, but I can work with the chair and with council on is how do we formally make that request? Is it a request that can come just from the chair, or does it need to be made by the board? That's the case for any of the requests that we made. I think then there's the larger question of making a request to intervene. I think we can probably ask more informally if they believe the time for intervention has already passed in this specific case. My understanding is that based on a very quick review, the Attorney General's office believes that is the case, that the timeline is likely up. But I suppose we could ask for a formal look into that as well. And we have been trying to keep an eye on the case, but I'm not aware of any of the relevant timeline. So I'm sorry that I'm not sure that was much more detailed, if that was sufficiently more detailed. Go ahead.
Thanks. So I do, of course, strongly encourage those inquiries to be made rapidly, both in regard to the principal or conceptual question at hand and in regard to the relationship with this particular case. If I want to know if the EQB still has latitude under subdivision 10 to intervene in the existing case, and or if we have latitude under subdivision 10 to initiate a different judicial review process for the local government's attempt to hear an appeal, extrajudicially and perhaps extra legally. So I, of course, as you all know, strongly encourage pursuit of those inquiries really quickly, and I want those inquiries to be made in a way that's mindful and ideally attendant to the time pressure and the process of the existing case. And I simply don't know enough about those time pressures or how these processes work to request anything different. But if you find out, Catherine, that there's some window to act and it is still open, but would close before our meeting a month from now, I trust that you'll let us know what our options are if we need to call a special meeting to consider that. Thanks.
Thanks, Member Bauerkemper. Member Foster, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to strongly affirm everything that Public Member Bauerkemper said. And I think that citizens, in Duluth have clearly spent considerable time trying to work for the public good and for environmental good. And I applaud their, very well-crafted statements today that clearly have spent a lot of time on this. So in that, I think it behooves us at the EQB to do everything we can to try to respond to that. If there's something we can do, and not just kind of let it rumble through, but try to take some action that we can take, even if it's just to find the information that says we can't take action on this. But I do want the speakers to know that we've all heard them and do applaud them, their work as engaged citizens, trying to make a difference here. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Member Foster. Any further discussion? Member Connor Steenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for our executive director, would it help you if the inquiry that Member Bauerkemper has been describing was put in the form of a motion that was then adopted by this board? Or do you feel like you have sufficient direction on this to get this done in the timely fashion that my colleagues have been describing?
Remember, I'm thinking through that. I think if there is a sense at this point I guess my plan at the beginning of the meeting would be to work to craft a motion to come back to you all with. I realize that takes time, and board member Bauer Kemper's discussion about the time. I do understand that. I'm not sure where we're at in terms of a quorum, if we could actually have a motion at this point. I can't see who's here. So I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what the best option is. I guess I would like to talk to council and see what we can craft and come back, if that is okay.
I appreciate that. I think the concern, and this is without expressing any thoughts about the merits of it, I think the concern is the clock. There's a perception that the clock is running, and that by the time that those kinds of things get sorted out, there might be some sort of kind of fait accompli kind of concern here. So if that is a valid concern, then perhaps Member Bauer-Camper wants to sort of formulate his request in the form of a motion and see if there's a second along those lines.
Yeah, thanks, Member Conner-Steenberg. I'm certainly amenable to that. However, I'll need like a parliamentary opinion. So if I form the motion, we get a second, and we vote without a quorum, can we still move the inquiry forward informally? I understand. I mean, if we vote and it gets voted down with a quorum, that it wouldn't move forward, and I certainly respect that. But if we move it in and we take the count and there's not a quorum, would the inquiry still move forward in the sort of informal way? Do we know the answer to that? Nick, Catherine?
Well, I guess whether there's a quorum still or not is something we could figure out. Ask the staff to make that count.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Thanks, Nick.
I think in order to do that, I might have to just call the roll again, if I can find my list, to just see who is still here. Commissioner Arnold was not here. Is Board Member Bakken still here? Could the board member go on camera? Thank you. And okay, Board Member Bakken, I did hear you. Thank you. Board Member Bauer-Kemper, you're still here. Board Member Commissioner Cunningham was unavailable. Commissioner Daubenberger had to leave. Board Member Foster, you're still here. Board Member Hintz here. Board Member Katzenberger, are you still here? Commissioner Kessler was not here. Board Member Conner-Steenberg, you're still here. Vice Chair Martin, you're still here. Board Member Barilek is not here. Board Member Nelson, still here. Commissioner Peterson's not here. Commissioner Christensen, I believe I see you're still here. Commissioner Stroman had to leave. Board Member Holman, still here. We are only at 7, so we do not have a quorum to pass a resolution at this point. I don't believe, unless I'm missing somebody. Are there any board members that did not say they were here? I only get 7. I think
that's not the count I got, actually, Catherine. Is that? I marked down 10, but maybe I'm counting it wrong. Could you just double check that?
That's it. I got 8 this time.
Got 9 this time.
Okay, Board Member Bakken, Board Member Bauer-Kemper, Board Member Foster, 3. Board Member Conner-Steenberg is 4. Board Member Martin is 5. Board Member Nelson is 6. Commissioner Christensen is 7. Board Member Holman is 8. Who am I missing? Voting board members.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. And again, I mean, board members, this is one of the questions that I have, and my brief mention about crafting some bylaws is unfortunately, I'm, in terms of what the authorities are for requesting these and whether the chair can request them versus the whole board needing to vote, I unfortunately just, I'm not completely sure of. So that, I think the first thing that I will investigate is whether is something that the chair or I can request on our own. Or if there needs to be a full vote. If there does need to be a vote, we'll work on crafting a resolution. And I can talk to the chair in terms of whether that should come to the next meeting or whether we should try to call a special meeting. And I believe we can work to get a better handle on the intervention timeline as needed. I will work on that. Again, I do think it has likely passed, but we can probably get more clarity on that without a formal measure. So I will work to get that sorted out and then see what this next steps are for taking a more formal action. That will work for everybody.
Yeah, thanks. It seems like the best we can do in this moment, perhaps. And I appreciate that you noted that part of your discussion potentially leads to calling of a special meeting or some other kind of vote of the board if we need to do that sooner than a month from now. Certainly want to be kept apprised. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Member Bauer-Kemper. And I also heard your request that if Director Neusler discovers that the deadline has not passed, but it would pass before the next board meeting, that would be a circumstance in which she would let us know and call a special meeting. Member Bakken.
Public member Bakken. The meeting chat information dialogue, is that something that is recorded as well for future reference?
Board
No.
member Bakken,
Sorry,
no.
go ahead.
Chair, you can. We have indicated no. If folks, we've been trying to keep that for logistical items. We did make the exception for Ms. Anderson from MCEA because she couldn't, her microphone was clearly not working.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion from board members? Okay. If there's no further discussion, I want to ask if there's a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I'll make
Public member Bakken, I would make that motion.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Chair.
All right, seconded by Member Kunner-Steenberg. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. All right, hearing no opposition, the motion passes. We're adjourned. Thank you so much to the members and the members of the public as well.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.